Hi and welcome to the Gem Hooks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the wire project today, I'd like to share with you a way to create a rosary link chain with extra embellishments. Let's head down to the board, we'll take a closer look and then we'll get cracking with today's project. So I've prepared a short length of embellished rosary chain for you to have a quick look at. It's a very simple idea. We're looking at a standard rosary link in the centre, and then either side we're going to add an embellished rosary link. Now you can, if you wish, put an embellished link on each link that you create. However, I think it's a little bit prettier with that sort of plain link in the middle. So I'll just pop that up at the top and get this bowl out of the way. The materials we're going to be using today. We're going to start with a 5-inch length of 1mm or 18 gauge wire. I'm using a medium copper. The main remit of this gauge of wire is that it will go through your chosen bead. The beads that I'm working with are 6mm rounds. I'm using rhodonite with a larger than 1mm drill aperture. So if we thread that bead onto the section of wire, again that's a 5-inch length, we're looking to get that approximately centralised and then create a little TIE fighter if you like. So I'm looking to have a space on one side of the bead and then a right angle, and then a space on the other side of the bead and a right angle moving in the opposite direction. So we're looking to have a good sort of 3mm or so either side. Now, as long as at the end of the day this ends up reasonably centralised, it doesn't really matter whether you get 2 wraps, 3 wraps or 4 wraps, as long as you have the same number of wraps on either side of that bead. So you can use your standard round nose pliers, you can use bail making pliers, or you can grab in your memory wire pliers if you have them. So I'm going to create a loop on either end. I'm going to make it reasonably small, so I'm using the smaller pin on those bail makers or those memory wire pliers if you have them. Create the loops on both sides first, ideally round, but it doesn't really matter if it's not 100% perfect. And then I'm going to bring the other one all the way around. And what I tend to do is, if I have one pass of wire going over the top, so you can see on the left side of the bead the wire that's moving away is on top of the design, what I might do is put it underneath on the other side, and it just helps me to keep an eye on everything being balanced. Now what I do want to do is centralise that loop on the end of that core wire that passes through the bead, and if it's a little bit too much on one side you can just rotate that around until it sits where you want it to. If it's a little bit too small you can just open that out. So to create my embellished sections for this embellished rosary chain, I'm going to complete the embellished pieces and get them all stacked up. So dependent on whether you want a necklace length, an earring drop length or a bracelet length, as I'm working on today, will decide how many pieces of wire you require. So let's have a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Probably going to end up with 9 lengths of wire to create a bracelet today. You can obviously adjust the number of lengths that you're using. So I'm going to create the embellished link as a complete piece. It's much easier to show you that one, and then you can link it together either with more embellished pieces or with some plain rosary links. I'm going to show you how to do both of those today. So let's pop those back out of the way. What we're looking to do here is to centralise our bead on that section of core wire. So I'm going to just squish a couple of times over the rounded part of that loop, not pressing down on sections where wires cross over. And I'm going to rotate that wire around the core a good couple of times to get me started. So let's get that done. I've got 2 wraps just on the right of the bead there. If I flip that over in the opposite direction, I'm going to repeat that now. So trying to keep things reasonably straight today. Let's bring that wire all the way around the core wire. So we've got 1.5 visible wraps and then a second wrap there. So you can see I've still got some gap in the centre, either side of the bead, to fill up. So while this is in my hand, I'm just going to take that over another half turn, flip the design back in the opposite direction, bring the other section of wire around, and what I will do is half turns at a time until I have filled that gap. Now I've slightly unrounded the section on the end here, so if that happens to you, you can pop those memory wire pliers back in, or your round nose pliers, give that a little bit of a squish, tighten up the core, and you should be able to get that a little rounder. So I'm going to go for another half turn on either side, trying to keep those wraps around the core wire reasonably straight, flipping it again to the opposite direction, and then bringing that wire around underneath. Now rhodonite is a medium hardness. I don't know the exact specific hardness of rhodonite, but it works well with a design like this. I'm not overly worried about it. However, it can get fractured. So I'm not going to make it so the bead doesn't move. I want to make it so the gaps are filled, but that there's no additional pressure on my bead. You will need to proceed with caution if you're working with glass crystal or beads that are more fragile. So once you have filled those gaps either side of the bead, and it looks fairly centralised to me, I'm going to trim away the excess. Now I am trimming away probably in total around 1.5 inches. So if you wanted a section similarly sized to this, there are 3 wraps on either side, then you would probably need slightly less wire than we began with, which was a 5-inch length. In order to tidy up these cut ends, what we're going to do is add a second pair of flat pliers. I'm going to use my chain nose pliers. And if you can see that sticky uppy bit just peeking out on the left hand side of the bead, what we're looking to do is to get that tucked away against the core wire. Now once I've got that pressed down, I can rotate those pliers around in the direction that the wire was travelling, and that will just soften the end of the cut, and it will sit down flat against that central core. So we need to achieve the same on the second side. If you are working with a very delicate bead, please do proceed with caution. Let me just angle this so you can see the sticky outy bit. There it is. Let's get that pressed down onto the core wire, just opening and closing those pliers gently and rotating those pliers around in the same direction, and you can see that we get that tucked away neatly so that both sides are now smooth. What you can do with a project like this is create lots of these embellished sections to be added into various projects. So if you overshoot and for instance you make 6 of the embellished links but you end up only needing 4, you're already part way to making a pair of matching earrings to sell with that jewellery, or to gift with that jewellery, or indeed to wear if, like me, you're a fan of wearing lots of jewellery. So there are lots of options. Another thing that I love to do is to put all of these leftovers from projects into a big pot, and every now and again I'll make a massive great big chain out of random bits and pieces, and they are very, very popular indeed at craft fairs. So let's head back down to the board and I'll show you now how to create the embellishment that sits over the top of that basic rosary link. In order to embellish our basic rosary link, we're going to employ another 5-inch length of wire. However, this time we're going to be using 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire, and it really is very helpful if you can give this a warm through. The wire I'm using is old stock. It's a medium temper silver colour on a copper core. It's a little bit pitted in places because I've had it for several years, but in terms of demonstrating to you, it's perfectly fine. But if you see any pitting, don't fret, your wire I'm sure will be much, much nicer. So what I'm going to do is find just to the left of the centre of this section of embellishing wire, and I'm going to lay it to the left of the bead. So I've got a split of around about probably 3 inches one side and 2 inches on the other side, and what we're looking to do is to take that over the top of that basic rosary loop, or link rather, bring it all the way around to the left of the bead and then back to the top. Now you need just a little bit of tension. This doesn't need to be floating around at this stage, so if that is a bit loose and it does move easily, feel free to undo that wrap and go again and get a little bit more of that pressure over the wrapping that we've done underneath. So I've got my 2 loops in the same orientation as the table, so as if everything's between 2 panes of glass, it's nice and flat, and we're going to embellish over the surface of the bead. So my wire has travelled around to the left of my bead on top of our existing wrapping, and it's now coming over the surface of the bead from the left hand underneath to the right hand of the bead over the top. I'm going to pinch that firmly into position, draw that wire close up against the wrapping to the right of the bead and up and over the top. So again, this should not jiggle around, it should be set nicely on that bead with tension. Now again, we'll be trimming away a reasonable amount of wire. What you may find, if you can't get the tension to securely sit that wire on your bead, you can take that wire for a second pass around the wrapping. I'll show you how to do that, but the idea is that you have enough tension at this stage that you wouldn't need to wrap a second time. However, if things really are not sitting right for you, you can take that wire for a second wrap and really get it firmly wrapping around the preceding layer on that rosary link, and you should find that hopefully that will firm up. Now with wire wrapping like this, I do like to see a little bit of that symmetry, so if you do it on the one side, flip that over and do the same thing on the other side. Now what we're going to do is to trim to around about 3/4 of an inch on both sides. So I'm not taking an enormous amount off on this loop because I've wrapped twice around that core wrap that we started with. Hopefully you won't need to go for that second wrap, but this is more of a contingency plan for you. So let's trim both sides away to around about 3/4 of an inch. You'll be trimming a little bit more if you only go for that single wrap, and that really is the preference. Let's give that a quick squish. Now you can use your round nose pliers or your memory wire pliers again, but what I'm looking for is a reasonably tight circle, so I would say it's better to use your round nose pliers for this. Get that circular form started and then switch out to any flat facing pliers, your chain nose flat or your bent chain nose. And I'm going to continue to coil that around until the coil sits adjacent to that stripe that goes over the surface of the bead, and then I'm going to push that down flat. So you can see that having that extra strand of wire going around that central core, it's not the end of the world, but this link now won't match the rest of my beads. So ideally try to keep it to that single wrap either side of the bead, and then you'll have a much more replicatable design. Either that or go for 2 wraps on every link that you make. So let's again start with those round nose pliers to create a smallish circular form, and then we're going to push that into the non-dominant forefinger and continue to rotate until you get that little double spiral. Bring that to sit adjacent to the wrap on that bead, and then press it down so that it sits semi over the top of those links either side of the bead. So there you have your embellished rosary link. I'm going to show you now how you can add that on to the chain. As I mentioned before, I prefer to see this design where there's a basic rosary link joining each of these pieces. If you decide to embellish every single link, what will happen is that they will sit at 90 degrees to each other, the nature of rosary linking, and you may not get the full aspect or the full appreciation of that embellishment. So I would much prefer to see those 2 pieces linked by a plain rosary chain. If you've done rosary linking before, then the next step is a bit of a repeat for you. It's just a case of linking those embellished pieces together with plain rosary linking. If you've not done that before, then I'm going to show you now how you can finish off the bracelet or the necklace and add a clasp into one end, and also how to link those embellished pieces together. For the next section, I'm going to just very quickly repeat where we started today, which is a plain chain connection in the rosary style. So we're starting with, again, 5 inches of that 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and we're going to sit that bead centrally, once I find the bead hole, on the section of wire that we've cut. Now it is a good idea to give that a quick smooth through, and then we're going to make it into a little TIE fighter again. So we're going to have wire going at around about 90 degrees on one side, leave a gap of about 3 or 4 mil either side of that bead. You can estimate this with a section across your pliers. Let me just show you with some standard chain nose pliers. As long as you're looking to get a good couple of wraps of wire in there either side, you're absolutely fine. So I'm going to use either round nose pliers or my little memory wire pliers to create loops on either side. And I'll bring one underneath and one over the top, like so. Try to get those as even as possible. because I've shown you this before, I'm not spending a huge amount of time getting everything straightened up. Now, in order to bring your embellished links together, you're just going to slide the wire down till it sits in the loop that you've created. Hold across that loop. Don't put too much pressure on the link preceding or on where the wire crosses over. And we're going to push that wire all the way around the core to get probably 2 wraps, I would say. Let's just tidy those up slightly. They've gone slightly sideways. Give that a bit of a squish, get that nice and neat and tidy. And then on the other side, you're going to take a second, because what we need to do is to have the embellished links facing the same way. Now, if I hold the piece still, you'll see that as it sits in my hands right now, the embellished loop is upwards. So if I put the wire on the right hand side of the bead through the embellished loop whilst it's facing upwards, when it sits in position, that faces downwards instead. So if we take that back out of the gap, flip it over. So you're going to take the tail of the wire on the open loop on the right hand side of the bead and pop that through the link on the embellished section with the embellishment facing down. When you bring it up into position, they will all line up and be on the same side. Now, in wear, they will move around a little bit unless you're going for instance, a set of drop earrings with a couple of loops in there. So the first thing that we will do is just get this sitting neatly. That's not quite centralised, so I'm just going to push that over ever so slightly. We're going to repeat what we did on the first side, which is to hold across that loop without putting too much pressure on either the link or where the wire crosses over. We'll go for 2 wraps and see how that looks. And I think we'll probably be able to get at least 3 wraps in either side. Now, when I'm making these to sell, I will sit and make piecework. So I will make sections that have beads which have the embellishment and sections without, and I will get them all sat in a great big line without having the loops finished off. So what we're basically doing is wrapping loops again, and that's a huge part of working with wire, but once you get the technique, it opens up a whole world for you. So I think I can get another half turn on the right hand side of the bead as we're looking at it right now. Let's tighten up those little coils while we have the access to do so. And if I flip that around in the opposite direction, I think I can get another half turn on that wire. So let's bring that all the way around. And again, you will want to just tighten those up just to make sure that they're as neat as you possibly can. Now, that bead is still mobile, which means I haven't put too much pressure. And we're just going to take away the tails of the wire and then tidy up as I showed you with the first example. We're going to tidy up those sticky uppy bits utilising our chain nose pliers. Let's get that to sit neatly. So if I just pull that down into position and then straighten the wire through the centre, that sits away really neatly, really quite quickly, but it makes a huge difference in the finish of your wire. So again, just pushing that down into position, and then you have got a completed section of that embellished rosary linking wire. Now, before you tie up that second end, you can add the clasp of your choice in directly, or you can always retrospectively fit that with a jump ring. I ended up using 9 beads, 9 lengths, 5 inches each of the 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and then 5 lengths of that extra embellishing wire, which was 20 gauge or 0.8mm. Again, they're 5-inch lengths. The beads I've used are 6mm rhodonites, and the finished bracelet has ended up at around 8 inches in length, which, funnily enough, is just right for me. So I'll show you that on the board as an outro photograph, and if there's anything that you want to see in a future demonstration, please do drop me a comment down below. Have yourself a fantastic day and a very happy new year.